Yes, Spurs fans, welcome back to the Irish Hotspur here. Another weekly panel show for you guys, joined by Jack, our fellow Irishman, and we are going to be talking about Thomas Frank.
Oh, you gone, Jacko? By the way, just quickly, no Colin tonight. Colin is usually with us. He's actually at a Christmas party, work Christmas do, so he's not here tonight.
My phone, for some reason, my computer connected to my microphone, or my phone's microphone, which is bizarre. Maybe it's just the new apps and everything. But yeah, we're going to be talking about Thomas Frank, the big game this Saturday. It feels like normally when you'd be talking about a Brentford home game, you would never be saying, oh, this is a big game. But I think it actually might be, considering the pressure that might be on him from the fan base. Is the pressure really only coming from the fan base? Is it coming from the board as well? Or is it just maybe fabricated that it's coming from the board? We'll be talking about that. Talking about some other things around the booing as well, since we know that Jack does tend to go to a few games, maybe more than Dave and I do this year. So I'm curious what he has to say about the fallout about that, whether it's something that he partakes in or also something that maybe he's been perhaps a bit annoyed by with how the fans have kind of made it a bit of a culture over the kind of the last maybe year or two, and where that's all coming from. And of course, the way that it fell out with the players, basically calling Spurs fans not real fans after the booing and all that jazz. So we'll get into it, everybody. Smash the like button for us, please, as you're coming in here. Good to see Dropkick Your Teacher. He seems to be saying that this is a must-win game for Frank. I'm pretty sure a lot of people will say that, but maybe there are others that will continue to use the patience word, which we've been talking about a lot this week, Jack, which is something I find a bit funny because I feel like patience requires seeing something, to get behind. And I think in the last 15 or so games, Dade had the stat that we've only won 3 games. So not a whole lot, I think, to be patient about at the minute. Good to see Iceman in the house. Hopefully you're keeping well. Ricky, AK Shags is in here as well. Big up to you, AK Shags. John Tucker, AE, DB Dish, good name, Kate Rixum, Tom THFC, and the good old Wayne Bonner. Really appreciate you guys. If you want to support the channel, feel free to become a member. And also as well, if you want to stop the show at any point, ask us a question in the chat. We do our best to bring up all the comments on screen and engage with them. And if you really want to get into this discussion, feel free to throw in a super chat. It does support the channel. Let's get into this one, Jack. I mean, is this weekend a must-win match for Thomas Frank? Do you think he will lose more of the fan base if he doesn't get a win this weekend? Is it imperative that he wins?
Yeah, I think it'd be hard for him to lose much more. I think it's been a massive snowball effect. It seems it's exponentially getting worse with every home game that goes by. I think the away games are kind of a nice respite for him. I think the away fans actually got behind the team from what I hear from the Newcastle game, from people that were there. But I think, these home games, like the Fulham game, you saw how toxic it got. And I think it's actually nearly these sort of lower half teams. You normally think of like the likes of Arsenal, Chelsea, Man United, Man City, Liverpool. They're the big games, the games you want to really compete in. But I think at the moment, it's actually just games against the teams in the bottom half of the table that feel like the big games, because we've just been so poor on them, really. I think we're expecting to maybe dominate them in a way that even when other managers have been struggling, they've still managed to get wins against these teams in a convincing manner. So I think, it's a pretty massive game for him. I think if it's another toxic atmosphere and another loss, I think he could find himself out of the job, to be honest. I think even the other night, I'm trying to remember, I think there was one of the substitutions when he took Bergvall off. I thought Bergvall was one of our better players. I think if that was in a home game, I think he probably gets that substitution booed. Whereas in an away game, you maybe save yourself from a bit of that. And I think there's been a couple of those substitutions. I think where Xabi got taken off against United, I thought that was quite similar to that. I think every single thing he does is under the microscope, basically. So I think you know yourself how much this pressure builds. I think we saw Nuno, the North London derby was kind of where it went wrong for him, and it seems to be the same with Frank. Actually, Chelsea as well went wrong for Nuno, same with Frank. So I think there's a lot of parallels between the two of them. I mean, we saw then how quickly things went from kind of we've started well and we're building something here to he's not the man for the job. And I think we're seeing something very similar there. So I think we need not just a win, but a performance. I think a 1-0 scrappy win. And I think if you lose your next game, is that against Slavia Prague? Is it next week?
Yeah.
If you have a poor, even if you don't lose, if you draw or maybe another scrappy 1-0, I think you're only one bad result away from fans turning on him again. Whereas if you get a Copenhagen performance in the next 2 games, I think he probably buys himself even a few bad performances. He's probably still safe. I think just seeing something that he's looking to build, I think is sort of the big big thing that you want to see from this game.
I agree with you on a couple of points there, where I do think part of the issue with Frank is that even when he has picked up points, the performances haven't been there, which then almost kind of delays sometimes these conversations and the tension maybe around the fan base. So he does probably need a Copenhagen type performance. That's a very good example to use. And then I also kind of agree with you about the substitutions, when things are tense. Have plenty of managers seem to be the boiling point, or just an example of the boiling points with fans. Like you said, with Nuno, I think he took off Lucas Moura, and I forget which
Lucas
game
Moura
it was.
for Bergwijn, I think it was,
Yeah, that was, I remember one. And I think plenty of times when Ange took off James Madison, when it didn't seem to make a lot of sense, it was a bit of a boiling point with the fans. And I think the very, very famous one would have been Antonio Conte, of course, subbing on Davinson Sanchez when we're chasing a game as well. It's one of those. It's not maybe the actual issue, but it sometimes points towards, okay, this is a real example that the fans really are at a knife's edge with the manager when they criticize the subs.
I think if Pep takes off Haaland in the 70th minute, I don't think the City fans maybe get on his back as much because he has a bit of goodwill in the bank. I think it's one of those things where people are already frustrated. Then it just further feeds into that. And just one other point I meant to make was actually just the fact that he's up against his former team and his, I wouldn't even say his protege, his former set piece coach. It's not even, he brought Justin Cochran with him, who was his assistant coach, a guy that was kind of in the background. If he loses to him, I think it's a really bad reflection on him, that someone that was so low down the pecking order for Brentford was probably the third choice manager that they wanted behind Frank and Cochran. I think that's a pretty bad showing, to be honest, if he loses against him.
Probably not helping out Thomas Frank too much too, that Keith Andrews is doing a pretty good job, almost carried on what he's been doing. They're kind of around the same position that Brentford have been, over the llast few years as well.
It's very reminiscent, I think, of Graham Potter leaving Brighton. They just didn't miss a beat. I think Potter's was very similar with Chelsea to what Frank is with us, and I think Brentford have kind of chipped away without him in the similar way to which Brighton did with Potter. So I think sometimes those really well-run clubs in Brentford, Brighton, Bournemouth, they just don't miss a beat when a manager or a big player leaves. Like Bournemouth lost 4 of their back 5, and they haven't missed a beat. So I think sometimes those really well-run clubs, they're so well-run that things just run really smoothly, and maybe players and managers look better than what they actually are there.
Yeah. And I mean, Dave, you and I said at the beginning of this week, he needs 4 points. He needs 1 from Newcastle, needs 3 in this Brentford game. But maybe you want to touch on what Jack has said there, that probably a really good performance could also help him, maybe more than we might realize too. Even if he gets 3 points, might not do a whole lot with the fan base. It's probably the performance needs to come as well.
I think if the performance was there, we went at them, we missed a lot of chances on the day, and we end up losing, I think he'll buy a bit of credit in that regard. But I think if we win and it's a scrappy win, I don't think it matters to the fans at the end of the day. I think fans will just look at league position and stuff like that. And look, to be fair to Frank, there is still a bit of time for him to buy, some time for himself to be able to work things out here at Tottenham Hotspur. Because like when you look at the Premier League and how tight it is, like, if we beat Brentford tomorrow, all of a sudden then we're up in the top half of the table. All the noise quietens down. All of a sudden buys himself time going into the Forest game. But if he loses, I struggle to see how he's really going to get things back on track, because then that'll be only 3 wins in the last 15, 16 games. That's form that previous managers have been sacked on. You look at all the attacking stats, we could barely, create shots, and it's like 4 halves in a row now where we haven't had a shot on target in the first half. How many times are fans going to keep turning up at home and accepting that and stuff? So I think where it is now, it really is on that knife edge. It really is pivotal that he wins against Brentford, because if he doesn't, then all of a sudden Brentford go into top half of the table. We're stuck down in the bottom half of the table, and you're looking at it and you go, well, they've lost their best players. They've lost the manager, they've lost the coaching staff. How are they up there and we're down here? And no one can tell me Brentford currently have a better squad than what we do. So then it comes down to the question is the manager getting the best out of players? Now, look, bear in mind, these players don't get any excuses about what's going on either, to a large degree. You look at some of the sloppiness, some of the areas where players are trying things, like Porro backheel the other day against Newcastle. Like, there's some of the things that Frank can't be accounted for. But regardless of what way you look at it, you look at, all the stats around Thomas Frank, you look at all the stats around the team. It just, everything is signaling it's not going anywhere. And the reality is, even if Frank does buy himself a stay of execution, long term, I don't think this is going to work. Tottenham fans, who would traditionally like to see their team have a go, are not going to get behind this long term. So for me, it's he's got to change his style of football, over the next coming weeks, very sort of drastically to get that buy-in, because long term, I just don't think he's going to get the buy-in from fans. And also, when you look at it, to be fair again to Thomas Frank, away form is quite good, home form is crap. If he can turn that home form around, all of a sudden, we'll be propelling up the top half of the table and we'll start kicking on. So it really is on that knife edge. This game is so important to Thomas Frank and his future, in my opinion.
Yeah, the home form has hurt him far more than the away form. If he could get half the away form that he did at home, we'd actually probably be in a totally different position in the league. That is actually a fair point. We literally have the worst home form of any team in the Premier League. Just let's take this one from Artist T, saying we could very easily go into the Forest game next week being at risk dropping down to 17th. Teams below us have very winnable games this weekend. To his point here, Jack, is that when I've looked at the league table and, it shows you the reds and the grays, right, of losses and draws and wins. Like, you look at Nottingham Forest, like, they've had a few wins. They've only lost one game in their last 5. You're even looking at Fulham, who have a better record in their last 5 than us.
Even Leeds have won more than us in our last 5.
In the
They beat Chelsea last night, by the way. We couldn't lay a glove on them, and we were at home.
Yeah. So you're kind of like, it's not like we're being that dramatic, really. Like, we seriously
West Ham have better form than us in our last 5, Jack. Sorry. It goes on. It's getting worse.
So, we are replicating, to say relegation form is probably a bit extreme, but we are replicating one of the worst forms of any team in the Premier League right now.
Yeah, it's fairly bad anyway. I don't really know how to put any sort of a positive spin on that. I think
don't necessarily need to.
Yeah, I think Wolves obviously are worse than us, but even then we couldn't beat. And Fulham have been fairly dire this season. We looked terrible against them. I think looking at Leeds last night, I was flicking between the Liverpool game and the Leeds game, and like Leeds were creating handfuls of chances against a team we didn't lay a glove on. Like all this stuff is so worrying. I think that kind of average teams are, even if they're not winning against these sides, they're at least giving them problems, and we're giving some of these sides absolutely no problems. So I think, I think alongside the form, but even early in the season, I think some of those performances, obviously looking back with hindsight, with the results kind of going a bit poor, maybe the likes of West Ham, obviously Wolves was bad even at the time. I'm trying to think of some of those other ones. Even Everton, the 2 set piece goals, I think some of those, like the West Ham game, I thought was kind of one of the more blatantly obvious ones. Even at the time, I was thinking maybe it wasn't a great performance. We obviously scored that. Romero had that goal disallowed against West Ham, and then Sarr scored from the corner just after half time. But those were the only 2 times we came close to scoring against a team that were getting hammered every week. And that's I think we played 50 minutes against 11 men, and then it was when they went down to 10 men. That was when we actually looked quite good. I think that was the 4th league game or 5th league game of the season, and I think that was kind of maybe a bit of a red flag. You would have given them a pass on at the time because of how maybe like early it was, but it's kind of just continued on that way, and teams have maybe figured out how to defend the set pieces, and I think it's led to us becoming very one-dimensional. I think the other night, seeing just Porro just hit the ball down to Kudus, he was getting the ball back to goal constantly. I think that's just, it's so one-dimensional. That seems to be our only game plan. And then the set pieces, the long throw-ins, I'm sick of those long throw-ins. I think there's a lot to be concerned about. I think we're still seeing basically the same thing we saw in August, which was stuff he probably taught on day one. So I don't really know what he's trying to implement currently.
Go ahead, Dave. No, I was going to say there's a follow-up from Artist T and AK Shex to you, Dave. Maybe this is a separate point, but he's saying, I disagree with you. Even if we had a hard-fought loss, it would still frustrate fans just as much. And AK Shex saying, if we play well and lose, he's still in trouble. If we play poor and win, he'll be fine.
Yeah, look, I'm not saying it'll take him out of trouble, but I think against PSG, off the back of a North London derby hiding, we gave it a go against PSG, and many people were like, okay, there's a few positives I can take from that. Now, of course, that was completely reversed against Fulham on the weekend, but I think technically it'll probably be the same against Brentford. At the end of the day, all Spurs fans want to see is their team have a go. If he goes and has a go against Brentford, he'll get the Slavia Prague and the Forest game trying to play that way. That's just the reality of it. Look, personally, I don't think there is any sort of like when you look at all the metrics, all the stats in and around, everything that we keep bringing up on a week-to-week basis, and I don't want to do that. It's just every time I keep seeing a new one printed, it hurts my eyes even more. And I think it's only fair we make people aware of it. But when you look at any of the stats or anything, there's nothing positive saying this is going in the right direction, or that this is going to last, or that this is sustainable. The only hope behind the only thing about keeping Frank in the job right now is just based on hope. He doesn't have the results to back it up. The teams don't have any good stats. You look at most of our stats, attacking and defending, it's more or less down relegation form, and it's telling us we're heading in one way. But to be honest with you, it was telling us we were heading that way, before the first international break, but no one wanted to listen to it, and since then we've absolutely plummeted. And when you look at all the metrics, you can't put it all down to Frank. Yeah, of course, he doesn't have a perfect squad and stuff like that. It makes the job difficult for him. And even more so difficult from him stepping up from Brentford to Tottenham rather than maybe a Conte or that coming in, because they'd have a bit more know-how and experience maybe to get more out of. But the reality is, whatever way you look at it, it's just not a matchup between playing squad and the manager. The tactics, the ideas, the way about going and winning games, it's just not working. It's just not a good match.
Yeah. Let's talk about, let's say, if the game does go poorly, Jack. The booing has been a huge feature in not even just this season, but it feels like the last few seasons, really. I'm just going to ask you, as a match-going fan, have you partaked in the booing in the past? What have you made of this booing culture that seems to be spoken about a lot now at Spurs home games?
I think there is a time and a place for it. I think the sort of stuff of doing it at halftime, full time, anytime you're just losing, regardless of how you're playing and regardless of who you're playing against, I think it's just a bit ridiculous, to be honest. Because I think, as you've seen now, the players are just like, well, you just boo us if we don't win, basically. So I think you maybe save it for those moments. I think the one time I remember me booing was the Conte substitution, which you brought up earlier, where he took Kulusevski off and brought Sanchez on. In fairness, Sanchez nearly ended up actually flicking a header into the back of the net. So perhaps Antonio Conte knew better than us in the stadium. But yeah, I do think if it's a sort of thing that happens on a handful of occasions a season, I think the players or the manager or whoever it's directed at go, well, maybe that was fair enough and they take it on board. Whereas if you're just booing them every week, you saw Porro and Frank and a couple of others come out and say, well, they were kind of nearly having a go at us. And it's like, well, it's us against you, basically, which I don't think helps anyone. The Vicario stuff I thought was disgraceful, to be honest. I thought I don't know who that's supposed to help. Like, Vicario's not going to play better because you boo him. It's not like he kicked the ball to a Fulham player on purpose. I think something like that. I think the only time maybe it'd be acceptable to boo an individual player would be if it was an effort thing, perhaps. I think Ndombele, I remember, got booed against Morecambe. He was basically, he might as well have been crawling off the pitch the speed he was walking at. I think that was maybe fair enough because that was down to effort. We were 1-0 down in an FA Cup match to a lower league team, and the guy's walking off the pitch when you need to kind of get the game moving. So I think maybe that's a once-off sort of situation where it's okay to boo a player, but overall, I don't really like to see it, to be honest. I'd much rather that maybe the stuff is directed at, I think, maybe the ownership or whatever. I think that's sort of like the players maybe still get behind you then. I think that's maybe a better way to go. I don't think it helps unless you're in a situation where you think the team is basically down tools. I think maybe then it's acceptable, but not when I think I don't think you could question their effort, really. I think it's just they're playing very badly, to be honest.
Does it feel more... Yeah, go ahead, Dave. Sorry.
I was going to say, look, of course I agree that booing doesn't help. But, but it's not like Spurs fans boo at the first sign of trouble. For instance, when Davinson Sanchez got booed, how many bad performances did that guy put in consistently before he actually got booed? With Vicario, how many mistakes the Spurs fans supposed to tolerate, before they end up hearing the frustration? And the problem is that, like, Spurs fans have let them away with it in the past, but you don't ever really see any sort of improvements. And I think that's where the frustration then comes out. That's where the frustration then boils over, And I'm not being funny, but, like, you can go and play a local Sunday League of Ireland game here. You're going to hear stuff from people on the sideline. It's always been in football. It's at every level of football, no matter what way you go through. Fans are going to let you know how they feel. Why are these Premier League babies any different? I get it doesn't help the situation, but the reality is, like, you take into account the the frustration of the price of tickets and stuff like that, literally pricing people out of the game. Young people can't afford to go anymore and stuff. That naturally brings round expectation. When Spurs fans sacrifice transfer windows for the sake of building that stadium so that stadium can generate big money so that we can bring the best talents here so that we can go on and compete for honours, and you're not seeing that happening. In fact, you're looking at a club that's worse off since building that stadium and that training complex than what we were at White Hart Lane and stuff like that. And it's, the constant, repetitive cycles of it just not working out at Tottenham, misses in the transfer windows, all this sort of stuff, all this frustration eventually comes in. And, a game or two, it's going to happen. And by the way, people are moaning about booing. West Ham fans went on the pitch at stages. They went after the owners in the director's box. So let's not pretend we're the worst or we're the only club that does it. We don't. When things aren't going well at a football club, fans make themselves heard. Teams that get relegated near the end of the season, their fans are sitting there booing them, and stuff like that. And then you got the players coming out. It doesn't help anything. No, but you're not doing anything on the pitch to sort of, try and fix the problems and stuff like that. So at the end of the day, it's just natural. It's going to happen. The difference is like, if I'm not happy with what Tesco's selling me, I can go to Dunn's, I can go to Super Value, I can go to Costco or whatever it is. But you can't change your football club. And at the end of the day, the fans are the only ones that hold the standards. We've supported this club long before them, and we've seen players that have put in effort for the jersey, and we know what standard is acceptable and what, the standard is at Tottenham. When we'll be here after them, at the end of the day, it's a common theme now that players, and look, I actually blame Postecoglou to a certain degree for what we're seeing coming out of the dressing room and Thomas Frank lately, because he's the one that started the culture. He had an opportunity to bring the fans with him. He didn't. He said, you're either with me or you're against me, and then all of a sudden, but when the players were with him in the dressing room, he was sitting there, don't mind them fans, don't mind the outside noise and stuff like that. He actually started that culture, but it's continued on now under Thomas Frank, and Thomas Frank almost, has put himself in as well by calling some fans not true Tottenham fans.
Carried on.
Who do you think you are? You're not a true Tottenham manager. I bet you'd cry if we said that to him. So, when it comes to the booing, I'm actually going to stick up for Spurs fans, and I understand where the frustration is coming from. But this is where the club then need to hold a meeting, like they do when things are going well, when Daniel Levy pulled himself out under Ange when we won our first 10 games of the season, and liaise with fans, have conversations, hear them, have some dialogue, and then maybe you might sort out the toxic atmosphere. But right now, all they're doing is sitting behind sledging fans, sitting behind the players sledging fans, behind the manager sledging fans, and the club and the board are just sitting there allowing it to happen when they could literally mediate and try and improve the atmosphere, and they choose not to. And at the end of the day, again, how many groups have been set up to try and improve the atmosphere around the stadium, and the club haven't wanted to liaise with them or help them get stuff set up to try and help improve the atmosphere? So people can blame the fans all they want. You've got to start looking internally. Everybody inside that club, it seems like they hate the fans, but then they moan and beg when fans don't turn up. It's insanity. And I'm not having to go at you, Jack, by the way. I feel strongly about this.
I actually think I do disagree with you on the fact that I think that I don't agree with the targeted booing, but at the same time, I think you hit the nail on the head that the reason fans boo, it's not because of specific players. It's ticket prices. It's the fan groups not being listened to. It's the club not basically being a serious football club. And I think that ultimately the players are the easy target. Daniel Levy's gone now. Like, I think that's led to maybe the players getting it rather than Daniel Levy getting it. I was listening to the Athletic podcast there on my way home. Yeah. And they were, I think it was Charlie Eccleshare on it, and he was like, the reality is, if Daniel Levy was still there, it would probably have been Levy out chance, not booing a Vicario that would have been done there in that situation. So I think maybe it's the easy target is gone, and the next easiest target is the players. And as you said, I think Ange maybe didn't help with it a lot by maybe having a go at fans. I think that was just particular moments. I think he didn't say anything. I don't think he did anything as bad as Thomas Frank saying they're not true Tottenham fans. But I don't think he helped the situation. I think the best way to rectify it, obviously, results fix all problems of football clubs. As performances and results, if you're top of the league, you won't have a problem in the world. But I think the reality is the club need to sit down with these fan groups, take them seriously, perhaps have a situation where the FAB, the leadership group, Thomas Frank, Vinay, Fabio Paratici, Lange, at the board, everyone sits down together. You at least have a representative from each of those kind of camps and you sit down and say, listen, this is my side of the story, and everyone listens to each other and feeds back. I think communication is a big thing on this, and I think one of Frank's biggest problems is the way he's communicated to the fans. I think maybe saying we've played well when we haven't, blaming fans for booing and stuff like that. I think that's doesn't help at all, and Levy's lack of communication for a very long time hasn't helped either. And
100%.
I think I think something like Binay coming out and maybe making a statement, doing an interview, saying that, of course, this is something he wants to work with. I know he was very good for working with Arsenal fan groups on this sort of stuff, so I am hopeful that maybe he can rectify it. And this is from scar tissue from long before he joined, so I think it's probably unfair to level it at him and level it at Frank and level it at this group of players. I think it's been set before a lot of them joined. But at the same time, as much as I don't like the players coming in at us, I do like that they have each other's backs, because I think if they didn't care, they wouldn't bother coming out and speaking. They'd just say, oh, well, I'm going to drive off in my Ferrari and I'm getting paid $100,000 a week.
Fair point.
Instead, they are showing a bit of fight, which I do like. I thought it was the same with that Van der Ven and Spence thing with Frank. They were coming off the pitch annoyed. I'd be more concerned if they were standing in the centre circle laughing, going, oh, well, we lost 1-0, but sure, who cares? I do like to see the fact they're hurt by this sort of stuff. I think it shows that maybe I don't know if they're not.
The results do affect them. They do care.
Yeah, they do care, and I think fans are angry. Players are angry. I think you're all having to go with each other because you're all angry. The fans have a go with each other because they're angry. I think that's just natural. I think you've seen. So I remember the Villa side and the QPR sides that got relegated in sort of mid 2010s. They didn't care at all. There was no one arguing with each other. They were just. I remember Julian Lescott put a picture up of his new Mercedes on Twitter after Aston Villa got relegated. There's no one doing that. They're players that are actually annoyed at what's going on. I think while it's not actually enjoyable in the moment, I think maybe it is something, maybe some sort of beacon of hope for the future. Maybe I'm just being delusional.
No, it's a positive spin on it, actually.
I'd be more concerned if they weren't happy about it. Or if they didn't care.
No, I actually think you raise a great point there. The fact that everyone's sort of frustrated and that passion is boiling over, and it's boiling over from all areas. I think you absolutely raise a great point that, you know, all it takes is a bit of mediation going, look, clearly it's passion and everybody cares what's going on. So how do we all now come together and fix it moving forward? I think you raise an absolutely fantastic point.
Yeah, I'm sorry, one last point just before we move on as well. I think most people are in agreement that Vicario is far from perfect, and ideally you would get someone new in. But I think the fact that should be taken out of his hands in reality. It shouldn't be him taking that flack. It should be whoever's allowing that to happen. Because at the end of the day, he's a guy, he's given 100%. I think Vicario is one player you could say he gets it. He's always one of those players that just, you can tell he really cares. Remember one of his quotes, he said, I would have walked from Italy and signed in blood to sign for Tottenham. And I'd love for him to be a better player because I really like his attitude. Porro's a similar one as well. I think they both have the right sort of, they kind of get it. They're nearly like fans. They're very emotional on the pitch, which you can only have a certain amount of those fellas, or you end up with a situation where you're playing with 9 players against Chelsea and losing 4-1. But I think I do like seeing that, and it's nice having guys that really do care out on the pitch rather than maybe mercenaries that would be playing for other teams.
Yeah, that's a fair point, actually. I think Vicario does get it. And the fact that even though he made that mistake, he still owned up to it. He didn't exactly even call out really the fans afterwards for it either. He just sort of
Vicario might as well have said, I don't blame the fans in his statement. I really liked his statement. And he came out and did the post-match interview, which I think I certainly wouldn't have come out and done that post-match interview. I would have said, forget about those fellas. I'm not talking to the media. And he made a point of coming out and speaking after that game, after he'd been booed, and probably cost us any chance of getting anything from the game. So I think that says a lot about his character. And I would love for him to be maybe a top-level goalkeeper, but he isn't. And I think that's something that should be taken out of his hands. And we go, he was a Europa League winning goalkeeper, and he wore his heart in his sleeve, and we have fond memories of him for that.
Yeah. No, he seems to have maybe thicker skin than others. I agree with that. Big up to Al Ben. I'm seeing him join in. Good to see you in the house with us. I think Steve D had 2 really good comments just quickly. He's saying we've reached a breaking point, especially those that have been fans before even the Enoch era were sick of the empty promises and being taken advantage of. Then he also says, Brad Friedel had an interesting take on TalkSport the other day. He said, players forget just how lucky they are, and how you deal with booing is to roll up your sleeves and show you actually care about the fans and the badge. And I think that's
Vicario did do that, in fairness.
Exactly.
Which I do like. Yeah, I think he did do that.
Yeah. No, 100%. Let's maybe move this on to just sort of the fact that we've been talking about the pressure from the fan base, Dave. Do you think like the Lewis family right now and Vinay are actually also considering the pressure and the future already with Thomas Frank? Is it too early for them? And maybe with Spurs fans, we're just sort of out of a different plane of looking at it. Where do you think maybe the board is at with Thomas Frank, if you could speculate? It's hard to say, really.
It's really hard to say because, we don't really know how much of a definitive say the Lewis family really had in the appointment. But what I will say is, Vinay is their guy they brought in. Charrington was in there. He's their guy. And they were in and around the club before Thomas Frank was appointed. So maybe they did have a part to play in it. But look, you can bring in a manager, and have the ideal thing around it of a long-term project and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, it's results that carry that. And if results keep going this way, they'll have no option but to sack the guy. They have no option at the end of the day. You got to try something, and the manager will be the first one to go. It'd be interesting to see what they do, because I think, it's sort of approaching a similar point where Arsenal were maybe at with Arteta. Their fans wanted him gone, and, the board sort of came out and backed the guy and said, look, patience and all. And I just wonder, will Vinay, sort of be an influence in the Lewis family's ear, maybe say that needs to happen at Tottenham? Because at the end of the day, despite people's impatience, and I do think you raised a good question yesterday, Jacko, when you said, how much of the Spurs fans' impatience has been down to the hiring and firing approach set by the club, the precedent set by the club in terms of a manager nearly every 2 years. And, is that why Spurs fans have a lack of patience for projects now? And I think, we're sort of approaching that point. If they really believe Frank is the guy, then, after the Brentford game or in and around now would be the perfect time to release a statement and just say, look, he's our guy. We're going to back him. We're going to back him again in January. And this is the intention. And I think if they come out and do that, I think many Spurs fans then will sort of calm down and try and get behind it. At the end of the day, all we want is communication in a clear direction. But right now, if we're going based on the policy of the clubs in years gone by, I mean, how much patience can you really give him? We're sitting down there in 11th now. Within the next, we've got Forest, we've got Brentford, Forest, Palace, Liverpool, and Brentford again. That brings you all the way up to the 1st of January in terms of your league games. All very, very difficult games. You're not picking up points out of them. And like you said, some of the other teams below us are starting to get their act together and starting to pick up some form. All of a sudden, you're back where you were last year. But we've done it in 4 months rather than 2 years. And it's sort of like you've accelerated the process. So at what point then do you make the change? So I think I can't really give an answer on that. But I think I genuinely results is going to dictate, basically the patience that he gains. But also, I would say, he has had a better transfer window than most other managers. It hasn't been an ideal transfer window, but in terms of the quality we've brought in compared to previous windows, they've given him a fair go to try and get this going. And at the end of the day, I reckon they've given them that to try and get a European place out of this league this year. And, we could be out in a hunt before fucking January even comes around. So, we know in years gone by that the previous precedent was top 4 or you're gone. So, I wonder if that's sort of still in around the club. We'll wait and see.
Probably wishes he had a Timo Werner signing to sort of scapegoat and throw under the bus. Thomas Frank could make it a lot easier to defend him. But Jack, I mean, this is the funny thing, right? We sort of have a good gauge usually of how the fan base feels about the manager and the pressure, but where do you think the board is at? Are they close to where we are, or do you think they might be on a totally different spectrum?
I think I'm kind of in the same boat as Dave. That I'm not really sure how much of a say they would have had in appointing him. I would imagine Lange probably was heavily involved in that, because I know him and Frank are both Danes. I believe they worked together previously. Yeah. That was very similar to Scott Munn. I know him and Andrew are both Aussies, and I think they loosely knew each other or ended up working together at some point somewhere. I think maybe you're looking at another situation like that, so maybe it makes it a bit easier to sack him, and I think it saves face a bit for the Lewis family if you go, well, this was Daniel's man, he was the one that wanted him, and you can get rid of him. But yeah, I think it is very hard to gauge, but at the end of the day, if fans turn on a manager and 90% of the fan base is against them, and I think there's plenty going around about how many tickets are on that ticket exchange. If people vote with their feet, the club have no choice but to make a decision, because financially they just can't afford for people not to be going to games. I know the on sale windows are already basically done for games up until the middle of February. So obviously those games are sold, but if they want games to sell out in the second half of the season, gone to the final third of the season, and maybe any extra Champions League games or FA Cup games they have, they're probably going to have to make a change if it doesn't get better, because at the end of the day, as we talked about earlier, ticket prices are astronomical. People are probably making sacrifices to follow their team. So I think it's one of those things, it's not included with my season ticket, I'm not going to pay for it because, well, I want to do something else with my money. I want to bring my girlfriend out for dinner. She's been saying, you're going to this football team this season every weekend. Why don't you show as much interest in me, who actually loves you and gives you a bit of happiness?
Seriously.
Right? So I think it is one of those things that when people vote with their feet, the club will have no choice, because at the end of the day, if it affects their pockets, that's all that matters to them, really. And I'm still skeptical of the whole Enoch thing, but I think I'd be of the opinion that the sort of footballers Frank seems to like, I don't really want the club to put money into that sort of footballer. I think it's more like, it's nearly like he's trying to build a rugby team with some of the players he's trying to bring in. It's more about how physical they are and how good of an athlete they are. I want to see good footballers. Like Xavi came in, he doesn't have a clue how to use them. I think he's out of the was it 4 signs we made in the summer? Paulinho, Xavi, Kudus, and Colin Moani. The one he seems to love the most is Paulinho, and on a technical level, he's by far and away the worst footballer. As much as he's very good at winning duels, he's not a great passer. He's not got unbelievable ability to receive the ball under pressure. Whereas you're talking about someone like Xavi Simons, I think he's, for all of his physical kind of shortcomings, he's an excellent footballer. And I think, you're probably looking at maybe signing more sort of physical. You're probably talking about 6 foot plus, can cover a lot of ground and stuff like that, rather than, I think, someone like an elite passer or someone that can beat a man for fun. I think that's more so what he's looking for, is that sort of physical attributes, and that's just not something. I don't think we actually lack in that area. I think we lack in actual footballing quality, which I don't think he prioritizes. I think he's, my way I view him now is kind of, he's more concerned with making us hard to beat than making teams fear us.
Yeah.
Like,
I think that was always this Brentford team, just hard to beat type of side.
Yeah, but that's very different at Brentford. What I gathered from him was that he would basically he would platform the players he had and get the best out of them. Whereas I've actually kind of seen the opposite here, is that he seems to platform sort of average players that are physically good, and can't platform players that are maybe technically good but physically average. So I think if you get those sort of really technical players in, I think you've seen it when Udogie, Odebear, and Xavi have all been on the pitch at the same time. They link up so well. It's 1-2, it's pass and move. I think you look a much better team with those players. I think they solve a lot of problems. I think you just get good footballers on the pitch and they will solve problems. Whereas if you're talking about physical players, if you come up against a team like Chelsea or Arsenal, they'll just run you around the place and they'll beat you with ease. Like, I think you do. For as important as physicality is in the Premier League, I think there's probably a lack of emphasis on how good of a football team you are.
Yeah. To be fair to Thomas Frank, I've always been a big fan of Ethan Pinnock and Ben Mee, and he's definitely platformed those guys. I am a fan of the physical players, but I kind of agree with you that Dave even brought this up the other day. Does he maybe do better with the average player than he does with the exceptionally skilled and technical player?
I think it's a fair argument.
It caught me off guard.
It's how he's made his bread and butter, right? Bringing in players, and it's how Brentford's model works at the end of the day. Finding undervalued players in the market that they predict, regardless of who's in charge, whatever, that this guy at their club is going to reach a certain potential and a certain market value, and then they can cash in and regenerate. That's the whole way the scouting model is set up. And that's how Frank has made his managerial career. And that's why I question, when he steps up to clubs like this and you give him better technical players or better quality of players, because no one was complaining about the signings when we signed them. It's only now people are complaining about them, saying they're not that good, given evidence or whatever. But how much of it is down to, like, you even look at the club's top scorers, right? Richarlison 7, Johnson 4. Two of the 5 club's top goal scorers, 2 that everybody wants rid of. But yet you can't get Muani going, can't get Kudus going, can't get Xavi Simons going. And I think it begs the question: Does he know what to do with a better quality of player? He seems to get more out of the average players than he does the better quality players. And the reason why, in my opinion, is because the sort of average players are more willing to sacrifice and, do the defensive side of things, whereas you're more technical players, you're more sort of quality players. A lot of them don't really see the necessity of doing that side of the game. Like, look, you just give me the ball and let me go and produce. Whereas Frank doesn't like that. He needs everybody to buy into exactly what he is doing and sacrifice. And sometimes you got to allow one of your better players just to sort of hang around, be free, and wait to give him the ball. I don't think this is something that many managers struggle with, stepping up from smaller clubs to bigger clubs. They don't know how to handle better quality players because some of the messages they're trying to get across, these players are looking at them and going, well, I've been at other top clubs and no one's been saying this to me. I can't get with that. And they just don't, they see that as a bit of a loser's mentality. And I think a lot of the players we have at Tottenham see it that way as well, to be brutally honest, which they shouldn't, by the way. Like I said, they're not getting a free pass, but honestly, I think it's a fair question to ask. Does he know how to get the best out of better quality players?
Yeah, I think the big thing with that maybe was overlooked was actually the scalability of managers. I think someone like, I know he's obviously been talked about a lot recently by sort of, I would say, football fanatics, is Vincent Kompany. Look how terrible his Burnley team was, but his football scales up. If you give him good players, he will get results out of them. I think Bayern Munich won their first 15 games this season.
Yeah,
Burnley were terrible. They were one of the worst Premier League teams I've ever seen. Even like when we couldn't win a game towards the end of Ange's first season, we beat Burnley still. So I think that scalability, and I think someone like Glasner, I think somewhere like Iriola, I'd be skeptical if they'd probably end up in the same situation as maybe Thomas Frank has found himself in. I think maybe you're looking at someone that maybe is at a lesser team, but is maybe playing a style of football you think scales up to those top teams. Because you look at the top teams around, they largely play a similar style of football to each other. Like Chelsea, Arsenal, Man City, Liverpool last season, they all play possession-based football. They want to dominate games with the ball. And I think that's just the way the top teams play. I think there's very few teams that deviate from that. So I think it's maybe looking at a manager that can dominate games in that way.
The scalability word you used is really, really interesting, because you sort of think like that was maybe part of the logic or initially maybe with Frank, was that, okay, he's done so well getting distinctly average players and really making them play at a pretty high Premier League level. So surely then the logic was, well, if he's just given better players, maybe he could get even more, out of these, types of guys. But then it does, like you say there, it does maybe tend to scale the other direction where they probably considered it, but it does go the other way where it's like, maybe to Dave's point, like maybe his real skill is that he is only really good at getting the most out of pretty average players for the most part, a bit like a Sean Dyche or maybe a David Moyes, type of guys.
David Moyes,
they get a tune out of these types of players, but not world class. Sort of,
thing is as well,
you wouldn't give him a Kavicha, Kvaratskhelia, like sort of person.
Yeah, he'd have him running shifts, covering, helping his left back out the whole game. Like,
yeah. Do you know what shows me he doesn't have the top mentality or a mentality for a big club is, I understand the theory of the no dickhead policy that Thomas Frank likes to operate with. At a club like Brentford, you can't get away with carrying dickheads, right? You need everybody to fight for the cause, even your squad players. But at big clubs, and you hear it routinely with big managers, that have managed at these clubs for a long time, there are certain players that you buy with egos that you have to give a bit of leeway to. Is Thomas Frank going to do that with some of these players? I'm not quite so sure. And that's where I think, again, he may have to tailor that the higher he scales, because when you're bringing in players that have played across Europe, some of them for big clubs, the likes of Paulinho played for Bayern Munich, the likes of Xavi, look what he has on his CV, Muani, these are players that have played for big clubs across Europe. Some of them are going to have a bit of an ego about you, and as a manager, it's up to you to control them egos. You hear any manager, the hardest part of being at a big club is managing all the egos. And if Frank just has one policy and everyone doesn't buy in, it's big players. The big players that you bring in to be the game changers aren't going to perform for this guy.
Yeah, I think Xabi Alonso's suffering from a bit of that around. I'm reading stuff that he's on the verge of the sack, even though they've been perfectly fine, but just apparently can't handle some of the big egos that they don't like him. And he's like, well, it's my way or the highway, and it's basically, do you basically sell 300 or 400 million worth of talent, or do you change your manager I think Ancelotti, I think, is probably the best manager
Yeah,
ever.
probably the best ever at handling those personalities.
Like the reality is the Real Madrid players, they want to go out, see lots of women and win Champions League titles. That's their mantra. They don't want to be playing systematic football in bed by 9 a.m. They're work hard, play hard, I think.
Yeah, 100%.
It's a very different sort of attitude.
Same across all top levels of sport, right? It's very rare you get a Cristiano Ronaldo, right? A lot of them do prefer to work hard and play hard.
Yeah,
100%.
I think probably Bayern Munich's probably the one club where you go, well, they don't have that attitude, but that's a sort of stereotypical German seriousness, efficiency and stuff like that. I think maybe that's the place you go if you want to be just ruthlessly efficient and in bed by 9 o'clock and up in the swimming pool by 5.
Then again, they are called FC Hollywood because they've also had some dramatic, spell outs with players in the past. So I think it is one of those things you have to consider at really large clubs. That you're going to have a guy in the team that is going to be that personality, and you're going to have to deal with the player politics inside the club. And some managers it's that sort of people skills that it's hard to really measure. And I actually feel for managers. It seems like it's probably a non-necessary cost of the job, but you are paid the big bucks to sort of deal with that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of that though in football now, where it's system first, players second. Where I think largely it's probably a good idea to have a system that works, because if you're reliant on one player, as we have been on so many occasions with Kane, Son, Bale, I think they're the three that kind of stand out. If you lose that player to injury for 3 months, your game plan goes out the window. But at the same time, I think someone like Pep maybe blends it well, where he plays to Haaland's strengths and lets Doku have that bit of freedom, and maybe the other 9 players are that bit more rigid and they have to stick to the tactics, but you let those few players that need that bit of freedom do what they want. Yeah. So I think there's a good balance between it.
I don't think Frank's system actually allows any of our players to really go and express themselves. I think it's far too regimented, and I just don't think it really allows any players to, and that's what we brought in Mawani, Kudus, Xavi to do, to get on the ball and go and express themselves. And I just don't believe the system allows them to really go and do that, and there's no fluidity in the system either. I think it's far too rigid to allow the players to do that.
100%.
Yeah, I think the long throw-ins are kind of that, they sum that up. Like, you get a throw-in it's not even that close to the box, and it's like an American football match where the players all line up in their set positions. And it's like sometimes just a quick throw in and try something, beat a player or something like that. That it doesn't have to be a long throw in every time. I think it's all very regimented. And I even saw the other night, Paro went to take a throw in, and he went to take it quickly, and Frank starts trying to talk in his ear to him, and it's like, just let them play sometimes, give them a bit of freedom. But I think that's part of the issue that maybe some of the players are having with the manager. I think maybe there's some strained relationships there. He looked a bit lost in the centre circle. At the weekend, he went over, players were going to stand in the centre circle, and he was just standing on his own, and nearly felt a bit sorry for him, as frustrated as I am with him. I think he lacks maybe that authority to maybe say to the players. I don't know if he has the respect of the players, is kind of what I'm trying to say. It's like they can't express themselves.
This is where I find myself at with Thomas Frank, right? I get that, if you really want to get the best out of Thomas Frank and what he got out of Brentford, you do need to give him more players of his ilk. But, is Thomas Frank a guy I really want to change the whole squad for,
No.
and get behind that? And do I really see it yielding results long-term or successful for Tottenham out of it? I don't. I think we missed the boat with a Conte or with a Jose Mourinho. That's where we, a manager that has pedigree, to their CV, not a manager that has just sort of floated up in and around, mid-table, with a team like Brentford. I think a manager with pedigree and history behind his CV, proof that he's done it at that level before, is the guy you should really be adapting your squad to and spending that hundreds of millions of pounds behind. That you see, okay, given that, this is what he's produced elsewhere. And I think we missed that boat. And I think because of the clamour and because of what went on last year and how close we were, down to the bottom half of the table, I think, everyone's clinging on to, we got to give this guy time. I understand the cause for giving a guy time, but I think it's the wrong guy, personally, in my opinion. He's not a guy I want to change my whole squad for. And I just think it's a complete mismatch in general.
100%. Yeah. I just want to say hello to some people that have joined us now, and then we'll get to Al Ben's comment here, which I think he's contributing to the conversation we're currently having. Wayne Bonner just sort of answering the question from earlier, just saying if we do lose this Saturday, we'll be very toxic in there. And, the board probably do have to respond in some sort of manner, I imagine, if it were to fall out that way. Timothy Street saying this is the best Spurs channel. Do appreciate you, Timothy. Phil Coyes is in the house as well. Big up to you, Philly. Queen Ellie's in here. Really appreciate you, Queen Ellie. Thank you for the recent support, as well as K32. Big up to Kieran. Harmless Potato as well. Future's Bright. Future's Lily White. And Andrew Burnett. And I think I saw PH Family in the house as well. Al Ben saying you hire a manager from a small club because their football tends to match up against the bigger clubs. At no point, though, was this Brentford under Thomas Frank.
Yeah.
Do you agree? Jack, you made that point with Vincent Kompany, right? Where he was a guy whose football you would think could scale up to the higher clubs. Maybe a Fabian Ertzler at Brighton, but I agree with Dave. Sometimes you have to be wary of these Brentford, Brighton managers. So
I think maybe someone that I really like now, not that I'm saying I've watched his team 10 or 20 times, is Italiano at Bologna. Because I think they say about the Italian league, they're just constantly basically under pressure. And he's got maybe a squad that you'd probably compare to Frank's Brentford, but he's playing the sort of football you expect to see from a top 6 Premier League team. I think he's been kind of compared to De Zerbi a bit with his style of football. I think maybe De Zerbi's one you'd avoid because of his personality. I think he's a bit of a volatile character, and I don't like stuff with him defending Greenwood, but that's kind of besides the point. But I think someone like that you think can maybe won't break under pressure, has a scalable style of football, and can maybe just be exciting basically and build a project with them. I think that's very important. And I heard a very good point listening to the Extra Inch. I'm going to paraphrase him because I can't remember the exact quote, and it was basically, I'd rather throw 10 Ange Postecoglou's at the wall and hope one of them works than keep persisting with someone like Thomas Frank. I think someone like, as much as Ange was flawed, I don't think his view on football was as mental as people made it out to be. I just don't think he could implement his ideas well enough.
But to your point of scalability of football, I think we have the prime examples at our own club, though. You go back to Pochettino and what he done with Southampton and the way he was playing. That's why he attracted the interest of the big clubs, and that's why he ended up getting the Tottenham job. And when he came to Tottenham, he was able to implement that because he didn't really have to change his outlook on the game, his style, his tactics, and stuff like that. When we brought Nuno here, he was a guy that was going to have to change his sort of football, and he failed to do so. And it didn't last. And I think, we have the prime examples at our own club of history gone by of what you're talking about the scalability.
100%.
Yeah, I think it'd be sort of like if we were to go from basically talking about football here. I know you guys do a lot of shows every week. If you were to go and start trying to make a show on ice hockey, like how long would it take you to actually learn the sport of ice hockey to the extent that you know the sport of football? And it's kind of the same with your style of play. These managers, they coach the one style of play for probably a decade. They're honing their skills, and then you expect them to, in the space of a year or 18 months, just basically coach a different style of football to the same level. Like you see guys like Pep, maybe their football looks very different to what it looked 15 years ago. But that's a series of gradual tweaks that you probably don't even notice over the space of that period. So I think it is very hard. You do have to think of that scalability, where maybe there's some special managers that can break that sort of glass ceiling that you maybe put on them, but it's few and far between. I think you're far better off looking at the scalability of a manager maybe than a results-based outcome on how they did with the mid-table Premier League side.
And also, just to Alben's point here as well, Alben, is, when you look at Brentford, the reason why, Thomas Frank made his name is, in fairness, he punched above his weight with limited resources, not as much quality as the big clubs can offer him and stuff like that. He punched above his weight. But where he's effective against the big clubs is his side were physical, corners, set pieces, throw-ins, stuff like that. It wasn't necessarily the brand of football. It was just how effective some of his stuff were against the big clubs. But what you're actually seeing with the big teams now is they're just effective in that department, but also in terms of, being able to play with the ball. And this is where maybe, to a degree, is Thomas Frank's maybe method, starting to become a little bit outdated to a certain degree, because you look at Arsenal now, big, strong, physical side. They completely changed it up, but they can also play now. You look at the likes of Liverpool, big, strong, physical side over the last few years. Man City, they got some big, strong, powerful players in there. They realized that small teams were sort of beating them up on the physicality department, and they've sort of changed that in terms of how they approach it in the transfer market and stuff. You look at a lot of the players coming into Premier League now, are 6 foot plus, and that's the way. For instance, the Arsenal team, when they had the good Arsenal team back in the day, they were all big, strong, physical players.
Yeah.
No one could match them. And I just think, this is where Thomas Frank needs to adapt. And I've been saying this for a long, long time, even before we appointed the guy. Your style of football is going to have to change, and that's what he's going to live and die by at Tottenham Hotspur. And right now, he's just refusing to try and to take the handbrake off a little bit. Just say to some of your forward players, go out there and play with some freedom today, especially at home. Go out there and enjoy the game. Feel where you can get on the ball, feel it, get yourself into the game, and go and fucking play.
Let's maybe, just speaking of style of play, let's just take AK Sheck's comment from earlier in the stream. He's saying, I know we're going to talk about the same stuff like XG and long balls, but would actually love to hear some ideas on what style we actually want and maybe how to fix it. It seems like you sort of said it there, Jack, that you are maybe more of the mindset of you do like the ideas and the principles of something like an Ange Postecoglou, which is very attack focused, very attack minded. And then just sometimes it's just not applicable, or they're not capable of making the tweaks necessary to throw it into the Premier League. But it seems like you're in that sort of family.
Yeah, I think my view of it is that basically Ange was very good at his in-possession coaching. Not elite, but very good. I think we saw a lot of very good in-possession football. Yet a player looked up Romero's line-breaking passes. He'd look up, he'd have 2 or 3 options every single time. He looks up now, he has no options to pass. The amount of times he was pointing at players to go somewhere against Newcastle, and he played the ball through the lines, and there'd be no one there to pick it up. Whereas Ange was just play, but then there was the neglect of the out-possession stuff where we'd lose the ball, and everything was about what we do when we have the ball, and it was like there was no thought process gone into what we do when we don't have the ball. Whereas Frank, it's like there's no thought gone into what we do when we have the ball, and everything goes into when we don't have the ball. So I think you see a lot of managers that are possession-based. They do struggle with that, sort of stopping that counter-attack transition from hurting them, but they do work on it over time. I think Ange didn't work, and he just kept basically, if plan A isn't working, do plan A harder. Whereas you have to tweak it. You don't have to throw it in the bin and start over. But ideally, if you're to keep it simple, I would say you have one of the best passing centre-backs in the world in Romero, who can play balls through the eye of the needle and break a midfield press where you take maybe 5 players out of the game. I think you start using that as a weapon. Porro can hit lovely diagonals. You don't always have to go straight down the line to Kudus. You can go across the pitch. You can hit it. Obviously, you can go to Richarlison. You can go to Kudus still, but just vary it a bit. Just a bit of variance. Take a risk in the centre of the park. I know a lot of people don't like the playing out from the back, but I think it's high risk, high reward. I think there's very few top teams that don't do it, and I think, yeah, really, I just think we have to take more risks in possession, really. And I think getting someone like Bergvall deeper in the pitch, I think if Romero plays a line break and pass to him, he can receive it under pressure, turn, take 1 or 2 touches, and pass it off to maybe Odebear or someone else on the left hand side, and then you're motoring. You're on to probably having a 3 against 4 attack, because the team's pressed you, you've broken the press, and you've got now Odebear, Javi, Kolo Muani, Kudus attacking a back 4, maybe 1 defensive midfielder or something. So I back us to be able to kill most teams doing that. Whereas the way Frank plays, it's like you knock the ball 60 yards up to Richarlison, hope he controls it. If he does control it, it's Sarr picking up a second ball, passing out to Brennan Johnson, he's unlikely to make stuff happen. I just think getting technical players on the ball and taking risks with them, I think it's quite simplistic, but I think it just will solve a lot of our problems, basically. Just basically playing to these players' strength. I don't think the squad's bad at all. I think like someone like Nuna, who we discussed earlier, I think he had a largely poor squad apart from Son and Kane. I think that excuse just doesn't stand with Frank. I think our midfield options aren't ideal, but other than that, I actually think we have a very good side. I think, as I said, Odebear, Kolo Muani, Xavi and Kudus, I think, is a very good front 4. I think for all the talk about the front 4, I think that actually is relatively strong. And I think it's just about getting these guys having the ball, just basically going 4-on-5 or 5-on-4 or whatever up against teams and just hoping that their quality can shine through then. And if that's the case where it doesn't happen, then maybe you say, well, these players aren't good enough. But I think at least give them the chance to have sustained attacks during games. I think it's very rare we actually see any sort of sustained attacking or control during games.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And look, for myself, for me, I think there's a number of things. First of all, I want to see consistency in team selection, especially across that front line. I think, I think he's over-rotated. It's something that I copped onto very early this season. And I think it's come back to bite him. The fact that these players now are in the thick of it, you are relying on patterns of play, understanding, of each other and stuff like that. We don't have any. I think that's a huge problem for me. I'm okay if he wants to, come in and approach a game a certain way, but then at least be good on the counter-attack. We don't have that. We did, going into games, there seems to be no attacking plan. Like even when we're playing long ball, it doesn't seem like there's a certain area that we're targeting that he's going to win that ball, and everyone else gets in and around and picks up that second ball. It just seems like we hit it in hope, in terms of the likes of the front line. We were constantly being rotated and chopped and changed. That can't keep happening. You've got to get a set of front line out there so that they can build understanding, patterns of play, stuff like that. Out of possession is one thing that bugs me. I'm not saying we have to go and relentlessly press, but pick a player on the opposition back line or midfield that you think is the weakest in possession, and then push everybody up. Press it then. Stuff like that. Don't sit back and allow teams then just come onto us. I've been a Tottenham fan for a long time. We have never been that team that can sit back and soak up that pressure. We will always crumble. It's just not the team we are, and we've never been that. We can't. So there has to be a bit more of engagement out of possession. To Jack's point down there. Romero. We've seen in years gone by. This guy has incredible passing ability.
We're not using it. It's obviously
been reined in. We're not using it. Pedro Porro, I've seen drop balls from right back over the top for a striker right onto his fucking dick. We don't see that happening. I think the way he operates the midfield, I think is too pragmatic. If he wants to play the double pivot, fine. But give Bentancur more license to break forward and join the attack. He won't, because he wants them constantly behind the ball to keep a solid foundation, which is not solid anymore, regardless. But personally, I think he should play Paolini in the six and play two midfielders ahead of him, so that when the defense do get the ball, they have that option there. But then they also have the other two midfielders dropping into positions that are hard to pick up and mark. You have them as passing options. Then you have the wingers also as your passing options. I think in possession, there's so much that I think Thomas Frank is getting wrong. We are simply just relying on getting the ball up the field, looking to pick up a corner or a throw-in, and look to build our attack off that. It's nowhere near sustainable. There's just so many things that I think Thomas Frank is getting wrong. And I do think it's because of inexperience at this level. For instance, he's never, I know that he's had to manage in the Championship, but he's never really had a fixture schedule of this intensity, of this quality, in his time at Brentford. That leads to him over-rotating all the time rather than putting out some consistency out there. And I think also how far we end up sitting back off teams when we do get the ball, who are we punting it upfield to? Straight back to them so that they can get back on it and start coming back at us. He's creating his own problems with the way he sees football and how he's setting up. I want him to take the handbrake off a little bit. I want to see a consistent sort of formation put out there. I'm okay with adaptations during the game, according to what's going on. But in general, have your principle of how you want to play, how you want to go into games, and then adapt accordingly. For instance, I heard he's great at pinpointing weaknesses in the opposition. I don't see that happening at Tottenham. I just see us relying on set pieces and corners. There's so much fundamentally wrong. And then, you have all these inquests on the sidelines. I'm not being funny. I don't know how many times a game I see cameras panning over. You've got fucking 10 eyes looking into one little 9-inch tablet. You've got this magnet board out. Then it comes to substitutions. You've got 6 people in and around, all sticking their big fat nose in trying to make a decision. It's way too much going on at a club like Tottenham. When you've got a game every 3 days, you have to have a principle of the way you want to go and approach games and do everything else accordingly to that. The way he set up at Brentford, when he had 7 days, he could adapt according to the opposition. He could work on it on the training pitch and he could get it across. At a big club like Tottenham, and I warned this when we signed him, it's not going to be as effective. That's where he's going to have to change, so that because you were basically relying on these players getting off a plane, straight onto the pitch and going out there and repeating the exact same thing again, which is why most big managers at the top end of the Premier League have their way of playing. We brought in a guy down the bottom end of the Premier League that has time to adapt according to the opposition. He doesn't have that time at Tottenham Hotspur. And that's where Frank is struggling to make the adaptation. Everything he knows and was able to implement at Brentford, he simply cannot do at Tottenham Hotspur. The fixture schedule and the travelling just does not allow it. And that's why it's so important for him to develop his principles and the way he wants his Tottenham team to be, and then implement little things in and around that. That's what the great managers do at the top.
I kind of crashed out on what you said there the other day when, I forget which performance it was, but I know people have their own take on what they prefer to watch football wise, but I really don't mind a counter-attacking manager. But I did crash out after one of the games where it felt like you see other managers that do have this pragmatic counter-attacking approach, but every time that their team does get the ball, they look devastating, and they look like they clearly work it on. When we do win the ball back, when we do get our rare moments to transition, this is what we do, and this is how we can hurt teams. And it's been so rare that Forrest, there's so many examples. Nuno's
wingers goal, they cross it, Chris Wood goal. How many times do we see that repeat with Nuno at first? You like, to your point, there's none of that at Tottenham in terms of how we get out and play the counter-attacking.
Yeah, so that's kind of my biggest concern at the minute, is that we're not even seeing that right now, which is a huge concern for me, because I think there are many ways to play football. There are many different styles that are effective, but you do have to have some type of plan when you have the ball. And for a large period of the season, it feels like there's none whatsoever.
And the thing is, look, obviously I prefer my style of football to be played on the front foot, right? It was the way I enjoy playing my game. But I also see the beauty of teams being able to sit back, defend, and see out and look to go and hit teams on the counter and go and win games like that. I can understand that. At Tottenham Hotspur, there's always going to be an element of having to do that against the bigger teams you come up against. The 4 or 5 teams that are better than you in the league that you come up against every season. But the majority of your games are against teams where you're expected to go in and dominate the opposition. And that's why your game plan has to be centered around that. And then when these big games come around, because you already have the ideal and the fundamentals, then you can adapt it a little and say, look, guys, due to the opposition, we are going to have to do this a little bit more today. But when we're in possession, we're going to get at them this way. And because they've already implemented their style of football, they can find a way around it and become successful playing that way. But, and I just like and I hated Nuno at Tottenham, by the way. It was the most boring time of my life, and this isn't far behind it. But at Nottingham Forest, I could see exactly how they were going to hurt teams. I don't see that with us, and that's a huge concern.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Sorry, Dave, I'm actually just interested to get your view on the sort of the team selection. Now, obviously, you don't like the rotation, but it feels like at the moment he's nearly thrown a dartboard just to select the team. Like it's
December. He doesn't know his best team or his best formation. I mean, it's a huge concern.
Yeah,
like he's had 29 games from the start of preseason to now. 29 games, and I get he's got injuries, but them aside, you should still know out of what's available what core needs to get out on the pitch as much as possible.
Yeah, but even specific sort of situations, I know like Gray, he had a couple of good cameos in games, and he was put out in the cold. Then he got injured for a month, and then he randomly starts him against against PSG as soon as he came back. Now, he played well, but I don't understand why he froze him out of the team and then waited basically 6 weeks after some of his good cameos and then threw him in against PSG. I don't understand that. Johnson at the weekend, he's basically frozen Johnson out for the vast majority of the season. Not the weekend, against Newcastle. He froze Johnson out and then just randomly threw him in the team.
He'll do the same with Xavi this weekend, by the way. He'll put Xavi back in after not playing.
Yeah, and Xavi's not started the last 4 games. I saw him saying, Xavi's had 5 or 6 great training sessions. So that means he's been training well for probably the last week and a half, 2 weeks, given the amount of training sessions they're going to be due. So why is he not gotten a start? Tell scored a brilliant goal against Man United. Only got his first minutes there against Newcastle the other night. Actually looked quite bright in fairness, but these guys aren't getting rhythm at all. Odegaard's the same. Odegaard was brilliant against Man United for 45 minutes. Had a tough game against Arsenal in a game where we were set up appallingly and hasn't had a chance since. So I just don't understand this thing of basically not rewarding guys for playing well in these cameos and then randomly just throw them in starting a game after 4 or 5 weeks on ice and expecting them to do something. I think you have to play guys into form sometimes where they're not playing that well. But like Tell, I just don't understand at all why he's not getting a chance. I think he's scored 2 very good goals where he's just done brilliantly to get the ball out of his feet and get a shot away. Against Newcastle the other night, put the corner in for the Romero equaliser at the end, and that ball caused Ramsdale all sorts of problems. You see a lot of time where the ball's sort of floating into the goalkeeper with no pace on it, and they catch it easily. If you put the ball in with pace, the goalkeeper's going to struggle if there's players around them. And he also had another moment where the ball was crossed into the back post and he hit it across Richarlison. And Richarlison was on the floor. It was a tap in for him if he wasn't on the floor. So I think you're seeing moments from him, and he's just, I don't know, he must be appalling in training, because I can't understand why he's not getting more of a chance if he's shown what he's shown during games.
I think he also played a part in, he took on his man, sort of took it across the top of the penalty area, and then swung it over to Kudus. And like, if he was more like a Brennan Johnson who would have just passed it backwards there, maybe that goal doesn't even come about, from Romero.
We talk a lot about mentality. Now, obviously you don't know these guys personally, but just from the way he kind of talks, and even last season, I remember against Fulham where fans were having to go, players, he went in and talked to fans as a 19-year-old kid on loan from Bayern Munich. Like, I don't know how many 19-year-olds are going to have the bravery to go and talk to fans when you're 16th or 17th in the league or wherever we are. I think that's the sort of mentality you need to reward. And I think he has the talent. I don't think he's been platformed in a way to use it. I think he's someone that could really be a special player for us. And I saw on Twitter earlier someone saying he strikes me as the sort of guy who maybe you have question marks about, and then one week he just becomes an elite level player and never looks back, kind of nearly the way Harry Kane did. Looked like he was struggling a bit, and then he just figured things out of nowhere and looked absolutely brilliant then. I think I could see someone like Talbot, something like that, where he just gets a bit of a rhythm going and just never looks back, really.
See, to answer the question about, the likes of the rotation and why he hasn't, stumbled across his best team or whatever yet, is because I genuinely think it's the way he sees the game and, the culture and the environment he's come from. It's been all stats related. Stats sort of dictate what he does, his team selection, stuff like that. Whereas I think he neglects the other side of the game where, you've got to get players out there to be able to build understanding, connection, patterns of play. Like, it's the same. If you go down with your friend, to play a five-a-side, you're going to have a better connection with one guy than what you are some of the other guys on the team because you play with them more. It's just naturally. And I think he neglects these little things, in order, because he look at the fixture schedule, he'll go into the physios and he say, right, who's in the red zone? Right, he's not playing, even if he's on form. And I think, at times, the stats may say this player's in the red zone, but the player may not feel that. He's confident. He's on form. He feels fucking great. Keep getting me out there. And I just think, the way he sees the game and that everything is stats orientated, even by the way he just relies on set piece and throw-ins, the way he sees shots from outside the box as low goal scoring opportunities is exactly why we can see the load at the other end, because of the way he sees it going forward. He's just, everything is about stats with this guy, and I just don't think he has the feeling of football where, or the nous in around where you got to let players gel. You got to try and have a core that you can send out there that no matter what other rotations you make in and around that, they're going to be good enough to be able to help you go and compete and win games and stuff like that. And I think he completely neglects that. And that's why you see Van de Ven being taken out, or a Paulinho being taken out, or for instance, Papa Sarr is involved in nearly every goal up to a certain point. All of a sudden, boom, sat on the bench. You're in the red zone, son. Take a seat. Sarr sitting there going, I feel fantastic. I'm in the form of life. What are you talking about? And it just disrupts players. They can't build up any rhythm when they're constantly in and out of the team. And it's just the way he sees football. It's also stats orientated. He neglects a lot of the other things in and around the game, the feeling of the game. It drives me mad.
Yeah, I think the long shots thing, I think, is a perfect example of the stats. I know we covered a lot of it there last week, that basically, like, if he's like, oh, well, the XG from this position is 0.05, so you're saying there's a 5% chance of scoring. If you don't close that player down, the odds of him scoring probably go from 5% to 15%, because he's a top-level footballer. If you don't close him down, he's going to probably stick it in the top corner. So I think you have to nuance stats. I think they are useful, but at the same time, you have to use them in conjunction with maybe the eye test.
I completely agree with that. I think that was his problem against PSG, was that he goes into it thinking that, well, if you allow them shots from distance, they'll miss the majority of them and you'll be able to close them out. But it's like, but PSG have multiple world-class players. Like, where if you give them that sort of space, they will punish you. Vitinha scored a freaking hat trick. Like, he's the guy that it's just, he's going to punish you for that. And I did say, to be fair, because I'm trying to be consistent here, I said the same thing actually about Ange last season, where I said to Dave, I was like, we leave so much space open in the back that maybe at previous clubs, like in the J League or the Celtic and the Scottish League, he didn't seem to consider that teams can be devastating on the counterattack in the Premier League, and he never really seemed to learn his lesson. And I'm wondering if a similar thing is happening with Frank here, where it's like he allows teams to take these shots from distance, and he allows teams to sort of be camped in outside of our penalty area. And it's like, yeah, maybe that can work at Brentford, for half the season. But if you're trying to compete at the top level of the game in the Champions League, you're going to get punished for that sort of thing. And it's a similar issue. But let's take Jerome's super chat. He's saying maybe he will bench Romero for leaving his position and took upon himself to become a striker for the first goal. I mean, they are our best strikers at the minute, Van de Ven and Romero. I think Dave and I have unfortunately gotten our score predictions completely wrong this season. I think you and I went for like Kudus and maybe someone else as well for being the top goal scorers at the end of the season. I think we're going to have to correct that, and we're going to have to pick between Paulinho, Van de Ven, and Romero to be the top goal scorers this season.
But for instance, Romero's second goal. That doesn't happen if you're carrying out Frank's instructions letter to the law. He would never allow one of these players to attempt a shot like that because it's so low risk. And this is what I'm saying, in terms of sometimes allow allow some of these players, because they are of better quality than what you've managed before, just that bit more freedom. That's what makes them the best players, because outside of the tactics, they can do these things and they can have impacts on games because they can feel the games and they know how to go and impact them. And that's exactly what Romero done. It wasn't a perfect goal scoring opportunity. He went for a bicycle and we ended up taking a point from it. And that's my whole point around it. Sometimes just allow these players a bit more freedom to go and express themselves.
100%. Thank you for the support, by the way, Jerome, and anyone else that's been in here. Please smash the like button as we're kind of getting on to the last question here. If you've been enjoying the show, and of course, like Jerome here, if you want to stop us at any point, you're welcome to do what he has done. But Jack, I mean, you kind of already touched on it. You did my job for me. But in terms of just the attacking rotation, we'll finish up on this question. What sort of lineup would you like to see in the forward area against Brentford? Who are the forwards that you'd like to see him go with?
I think definitely Colin Mwani. I like what I see from Colin Mwani. I think he's someone that once the forward line clicks, I think he'll score plenty of goals. Kudus, I thought, was excellent against Newcastle. I thought he had a very hard job. First half, he must have taken the ball in his chest 5 or 6 times with his back to goal, facing his own goal with Lewis Hall right up behind him. And he did unbelievably well to get out of trouble a lot of times. And it was actually the times where he got the ball on the edge of the box that he was actually able to beat one of the better fullbacks in the league. So I think keeping him in the team and finding a bit of form now that he looks fully fit, I think is a priority. Xavi, I would like to see him start, but as we said, he's probably got no rhythm at the moment. I thought he looked sharp enough when he came on, but I just think you have to play him into form, even if it's to the detriment of maybe the result at the weekend. I think he's someone that you just get him playing, and I think will reap the rewards of that eventually. And then I think I'd like to see Tell, but I think you're probably talking about too many players then that haven't played a huge amount of football. So I'd maybe go Otterbear with then Udogie overlapping him on the left-hand side. So I really like that dynamic that those 3 guys have. I feel like I reference it every single episode, the Otterbear, Udogie and Xavi triangle. I think the 3 of them link up well and create chances. So I think, I get those guys in, and maybe hopefully see Bergvall maybe in a deeper role. I don't really like him in that number 10. I think he does a decent job at it, but I think if you get him in deeper areas, I think we look a much better team. So I think that's probably also an important part of the attack as well.
Dave, I think you want a similar lineup, even though I know Jack seems to be vouching for Matisse Tell. He did pull that back by saying maybe just throwing in too many guys that haven't necessarily seen a ton of action. But I think you more or less said the same thing. You want to see Odegaard, Xavi, Mwani strike that combination again. Kudus is sort of a must, and maybe Tell off the bench.
Yeah, for me, I think, to Jack's point, I think you got to play Doggy at left back. He links up really well with Udebar. Xavi Simons tends to drift out there a lot when they're playing. So that's a combination you can sort of work around. I think Mwani is by and far and large the best option up front, because some of these games you aren't going to have possession of the ball, but you do need a player that, you can go long ball to and hold it up and stuff like that. I think Mwani offers a better all-round game than Richarlison. And then I think, Kudus off the right-hand side. And I think if you can put that out for 4 or 5 games running, I think you start seeing green shoots I think you start seeing positives. I think, when you go back to Copenhagen, it was Mwani, Simmons, Udebar, and they ran right against him. I know Johnson was on the right-hand side, but, Barry's goal, he done absolutely fuck all and got a red card that night. But, you add Mwani into that, and I think that's your starting line. I think that's your forward line moving forward. I think it's the one that will produce the most numbers. And then eventually you can start bringing the likes of Italian off the bench or Richarlison off the bench, and they'll be able to blend in with them. But it's about getting that core four going. And once you get that going, you can make rotations and other players will start seamlessly fitting in.
Even Sebas Wolf coming in saying he wants to see Tel, Mwani, Kudos, Simmons in the middle. I wonder if the majority of fans seem to be in that boat. I've seen a lot of this lineup on Twitter, Sebas. Really appreciate your support and longevity of love and support for this channel, my friend. Tom THFC as well, saying great show as always, guys. Really do appreciate you, Tom. And then Eddie has come here, maybe out the back of the earlier conversation we were just having. Member for 20 months, saying he needs to do a lot better. We're worse off in every single stat that matters compared to last. We were missing our backline this time last season. Frank has not been given a better squad or has been given a better squad, and he isn't making, I think, the most of it. I think is what
I get what Eddie's saying. But what I would say, Eddie, is I don't think we need to keep comparing, one to the other, because I think right now, because of the contrast in how people see both managers, it just sort of plays off as point scoring. I think there's more than enough to judge Thomas Frank on what we're actually seeing than having to bring the likes of Postecoglou into it, or justification or stuff like that. And I'm not saying Eddie's doing it, and I can get what he's sort of getting at to a certain degree, but I think things are bad enough to point out things about Frank on his own merit and what we're seeing, rather than because it just comes across as point scoring. At the end of the day, all it does is drive it further and further and further, and then no real conversations can actually take place, in terms of what's actually right for this football club. So I think just judge Frank on Frank and forget about it. Thanks for the Europa League. We move on.
I think there are plenty of times when it's natural to make the comparison for me, Jack. Like there are plenty of times when you almost do kind of, it's hard not to make the comparison, but you're not doing it in like some sort of disingenuous way. You're just like saying, this was what we used to do. This is what we do now. I totally get those. But to Dave's point, there have been times when you're having these difficult conversations about Frank, but then someone comes in and they'll just say like, well, Ange lost, 22 games. Like, just suck it up. We're doing so much better. It's like, yeah, but like, come on, like we should be talking about what we're currently doing instead of just constantly reflecting on what went wrong or what went well even last season.
Yeah, I think the 17th place finish, I think, is probably a better thing to compare rather than going manager versus manager, saying that, well, 17th place was about as bad as it could go in the league. And the worrying thing is we don't really look better than when we finished 17th. Even though we're not quite 17th, I don't think we actually look a better team than the one that came 17th last season, regardless of manager, which is obviously concerning. I think other than Van de Ven and Odegaard, I can't really think of any player that's actually playing better this season than they did last season. Maybe Richarlison, but that's just based on him being fit. I think he just wasn't really fit last season. But other than that, I can't think of a player that's actually playing better than what they did last season, which is obviously a concern because you want to see progress at the same time. Even if you're not comparing the managers, you want to say, well, I've seen 6 or 7 players that look like completely different players to what they did last season, which I think Johnson looks a completely different player in that he's not scoring goals, which he was doing last season for all of his shortcomings. So I think there is some concern in that regard. Bergvall as well, I think, looks half the player he looked last season. He got, I think, fans player of the season, players player of the season last season for us. I think that there's some kind of worrying signs maybe there that we were as bad as we were last season, and you're seeing a lot of players kind of actually getting worse rather than better.
Probably.
And just quickly to Eddie's point as well, Jack, like I understand naturally it's going to happen, but I just think because of the whole divisive nature around it, I think no matter who brings it up, even if they even if that's not their intention, it's going to be seen as point scoring because of the whole divisive nature around it. So I just think, why even bother? Just analyze what we're seeing.
I like that you've
even
said
if that's not the intention, it's just going to happen.
I like what you said. We kind of already have enough of a sample size with Thomas Frank that we can almost avoid it when necessary too. Like we've already seen enough of Frank to make some conclusions here and there. Of course, there's still plenty of times for him to fix it and things like that. But like we don't need to. Maybe earlier we sort of had to. Maybe it was kind of necessary to make these comparisons, but now it doesn't really feel like you need to do it all the time. Really.
Yeah, but I just think when you do, because it's so divisive, people are just going to automatically think it as point scoring, and And that's when conversations then just get silly and it's back and forth, people defending a guy. At the end of the day, all I care about is Tottenham Hotspur, regardless of the manager, the players and that. And I'm just going to judge it on what I'm seeing in front of me rather than backing a guy in point scoring.
100%. Jack, I put in your Twitter here as we're wrapping things up. Any final
Lovely,
words?
thank you. No, I think hopefully we can come on next week and be talking about how Thomas Frank looks like he's turning things around. I think we've was it Brentford Saturday at 3:00, and there's Tuesday or Wednesday we have Slavia Prague. So hopefully we can say, look, 2 great performances, scored 7 goals, didn't concede any, looked really good and a lot more adventurous. But I won't maybe hold my breath. I think we could be here next week going, I wonder who our next manager is going to be.
Well, I hope not.
I really hope not. I hope we're talking about our first David and I've joked, like, are we ever going to see, I think it was Faz Radfire said this, are we ever going to see like a 4-0 Spurs, this season? Maybe I hope it comes up against Brentford. That would be absolutely terrific.
Yeah, I'd love for him to turn it around, but I can't really see it. I think a lot of this is just prolonging the inevitable. But as Dave said, it's my view on football is just so far away from what this manager's is that maybe I'm maybe being slightly unfair on him, but it is very frustrating when you spend so much your time, energy, and money on it to be kind of shown what we're being shown at the moment.
But what I will say though on that Jack, though, just quickly, is I don't think it's just the way you or I see it. I think most fans in general, who are Spurs fans, because if it wasn't passed down to you through parents or someone in your family or whatever, you got into Spurs because of the way they played, with what they had and stuff, that they were an exciting team to watch most weeks and stuff. Like if you became a fan under Pochettino, look at the way we played, So I think just naturally that's the way we are as a club and the fan bases in general. Like obviously you have your few like Jack, who's a pure, football guy. He doesn't mind, the more defensive side. And like I said, I can understand it, but do it with still a purpose of going forward. And when you don't see that with a manager, I think then you're only heading one way. Like, you got to be able to score goals at Premier League level. That's how you go and win games. That's how you put points on the board. If we don't have that ability, we're doomed. But to your point, I certainly don't want to be here next week talking about potential managers. I'm absolutely bored of it. It's rinse and repeat. It's almost becoming our own special little transfer window that no other club has. It's really starting to piss me off.
Yeah. Eddie, just following up, saying, like Davo said, it wasn't my intention. I just hope Frank does get it right, because at the end of the day, I just want to win. I'm a sore loser. Big up, Eddie. Appreciate you, buddy. No, I think he's under pressure at the end of the day, Eddie. And so if you feel like Frank isn't getting it right, he's got to get it right sometime soon. Of course, we did talk about where the board is at. We don't really seem to know, but I imagine if things do go poorly, Eddie, this weekend, I'd be surprised if we don't get some murmurings, either from the board or maybe through some journalists, that might have some inside connection as to where things go, because I imagine it would be a very toxic atmosphere if things don't go well this weekend. And I think Jack more or less said, if the fans respond in a pretty toxic manner, and if they do sort of really vent their frustrations this weekend, they can't ignore that. They can't just put their heads in the sand. I think they are going to react.
I think the phrase that Jack summed it up perfectly was, fans will vote with their feet. You're already seeing all over socials and in group chats, people giving up tickets, not wanting to go. That's a concern, because usually, people are starting to go, I've better things to do. But most other times when Spurs are doing well, you will give up things to be there. And when fans are not doing that anymore, they start voting with their feet, to Jack's point, and the manager will be gone.
100%. Yeah, I think one thing I've noticed is the last 18 months, 2 years, is the amount of people that used to text me going, how do I get Tottenham tickets? I don't get those texts anymore.
Yeah.
So I think that says a lot. I think a lot of people say, oh, well, there's a lot of Korean fans not going with Sonny going. But I even noticed myself, the people that would have been asking me for tickets before are going, you don't hear from them asking for tickets. I think either they don't want tickets or they can just come across tickets so easily themselves that they don't even have to ask. The days of sitting in those queues on the windows. Yeah.
That's funny. Well, everybody, really appreciate all the generous support today. Thanks for being here with us. Great conversation as always with Jack. And of course, we did miss Colin, but I thought Jack filled in very, very well. He has really good things to say. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the show. Thank you to Dropkick Your Teacher. Thank you to Al Ben, Jerome, Eddie, Joker Davis, Sebas Wolf as well for all the generous support. Thanks for anybody that's been in here. Smash the like button on your way out, as C4 says in the chat there. We'll see you this weekend, this Saturday, for a very intense game, I imagine. And hopefully we do pick up a decent win and hopefully a good performance so that we don't have to keep repeating these difficult conversations. It would be nice to be on Cloud Cuckoo land. We'll see you all tomorrow, everybody, for a little pre-match stuff with the members. And of course, we'll be putting out predicted lineups and all that good business. So we'll see you very soon, everybody. Come on, you Spurs.
Come on, you Spurs.